Dear students, so welcome back to Property Law, HOE 6011, and well, we continue with what we were looking at. So we have already covered lecture notes 1A and B, and you've also seen the homework assignments, so that's all up over there. And then there was some more information that I've put up in Moodle, so maybe would be a good time just to go over some of these things. And of course, well, there is this whole aspect about property and the body, and I spoke about that a bit last time. And you saw also how some of these things are quite different from previous occasions. And this is a new developing area. I've also put up, I believe, some videos last time, so you can see more about them, surrogacy and things like that. There are also, of course, some aspects about this which you should consider. There are different theories, so I've put up some of these over here, and then just for reading purposes, just to open up your minds about how these things are. Then there are some interesting areas that come up nowadays. I've been putting up also and sending you also some news items and things like the Banksy, murals and stuff, and we'll talk about that in more detail also in the relevant places. But you can see already over here there are sperm donor bank issues, and big problems can arise with this, because generally it was understood that if you donate an organ, or if you donate, for instance, sperms, then it's a good thing that you're doing for society. Interestingly, there were some surveys conducted which showed that at least in North America, um, at least 10-15 years ago, the preferred sperm donor was somebody who would be Scandinavian, 2 meters tall, blonde with blue eyes, and holding a PhD. Yeah, well, that was the preferred, um, you know, sperm donor. I'm presuming, obviously, for white couples, and there have been some issues lately because it just turned out there was this research, a documentary that was conducted, and there was this young woman, and she wanted to know who was the father, the sperm donor, and her efforts were stonewalled. But then she managed to get some inputs, and she was able to contact other children of people who had received those sperms from the same sample, or the same donor. And then it turned out that this guy had been really prolific, and there were almost 200 children who were actually his. And it led to some very interesting legal issues. Number one, of course, is his cover got blown, yeah, which was a bit unfortunate. And because although he was guaranteed that there would be secrecy, that was not the case. And surprisingly, some children sued him for parental support and for a share of his property. So you can see how this can be quite a problem. Then there are some news items. You always hear about this in Finland, in Estonia, many places. There's some old house in the village, in the countryside, and then you are redoing it, or just clearing it out or repairing it, and then you open a section of the wall, and out fall some guns or pistols and ammunition. And so these can of course cause a lot of issues, because as the owner you have certain responsibilities and liabilities now. This can also come out in the context of pornographic magazines. And now this is a very strange situation. So here was this man, and he bought a flat in the 1970s, and uh, he had been living in it, and he was this architect or something, and then you can read more about it over there, and traveling all around the world and stuff. And well, one day he was out, and there was a fire in the neighborhood and in the neighboring flats, and then the fire sort of spread, and so the fire brigade people came, and they have to uh, extinguish the fire, and also in the process they have to demolish some parts and remove some wooden furniture and things. And this is a part of the firefighting exercise. And well, during the course of those events, they came across some child pornographic magazines hidden inside the wall. And this guy didn't know anything about them. I mean, that's what he claims. He was out of the country, and when he came back, then he was arrested on the charge of possessing child pornographic magazines, which are illegal. And his defense was that he has no idea what was in the wall and who had put them in the wall 30 years, 40 years ago. And so, of course, this can cause a lot of issues. Then there was this other case, again, not so much as a case, but some people like to buy military stuff, and somebody managed to get a tank, a military tank from Iraq. Now you see, these are just vehicles. If you remove the guns and the other military equipment, then it's just a vehicle with wheels and tracks and an engine. So he got it, and it was imported to the UK as a heavy motor vehicle and tracked vehicle. And then he took possession of it. And well, after a few months, then he started tinkering around with it just to see how it is, and if it can be made to work again. A lot of these equipment are sold as scrap because they are not in running condition. And while exploring the features of this vehicle, he came across the fuel tank, and it seemed extra heavy. And then he dismantled it and opened it up and found gold bars hidden inside. Obviously, from the Iraq historical period, yeah, there must be something, Saddam Hussein's Republican cards or whatever. And so they had hidden some of their loot or stolen property, or was it state property? Nobody knows, because there was this whole chaos. There was a civil war after Saddam Hussein died. So, well, again, these are all issues that are very interesting from a property law perspective, because as we are studying over here, there are a lot of aspects about property law which are quite straightforward, but also we have some of these twisted issues, and it's very difficult to understand who is the present owner, because of the fact that situations have changed, times have changed, and there are strange circumstances now. Then there's also this inheritance and the posthumously conceived child, so you can read about that. And I've also written about this in an article in Delphi, and it's for a newspaper, and it's in Estonian, but again, interesting issues. And well, with coronavirus pandemic times, it's also becoming quite interesting, because of late you're coming across a lot of issues, news items whereby you have shopping malls, and they say that entry is restricted and only people who wear a mask can enter in. And then there are long debates and problems about this, because some people claim that a Virukeskus or Stockman is a public area, but they don't realize that it is, after all, private property. And so there were a lot of fights in this regard. And if you look in Estonian news, especially yesterday, somebody in the Rocca al Mare shopping complex was beaten up by security guards. And then again, there are a lot of these videos coming up. People don't want to wear masks, but they're not allowed entry into shopping malls or shops if they don't wear masks. So all of this comes down to the issue of what is the right of the owner. So if you're the owner, then what rights can you exercise, and what is a public property vis-a-vis a private property. And again, these are a lot of things that I've been talking about in detail. So I hope this becomes more and more topical for you as this pandemic unfolds in the second year. So we looked at some aspects last time. We looked at gift and will, and these were all in the context of how ownership can be acquired. So there was succession, gift, will, and we're looking at it specifically in the context of property, not in the abstract meaning like it was in the previous lectures. Where you could obtain property or ownership of property by discovering it or things like that, but rather more practical aspects from a legal viewpoint. So another way of acquiring property is through the law of obligations, or contract law as it's called. And then of course, well, it's quite straightforward and simple. I have a pen and I want to sell it to you. So I transfer ownership from myself to you. And of course, there are certain criteria that need to be fulfilled over here. It's not straightforward because number one, if the agreement is to be valid, it should have at least five criteria. There should be the consent. Yeah, so I give it to you out of consent, and you take it out of consent. Yeah, I don't force it to you, or you don't force me to give it to you. Then there's the capacity to contract, which could mean, well, either I have to be an adult, 18 years, 21 years, depending on the jurisdiction, and also, that I don't have any mental disability which may prevent me from exercising free and fair judgment. Then there should be a definite object. Yeah, a pen, say this is a definite object which forms the subject matter of the undertaking. Then there should be a lawful cause in the obligation, so it should be, for a lawful purpose. And of course, there should be consideration. Consideration is this aspect that if this pen is worth, let's say, €1,000, and I give it to you for €1, or sell it to you for €1, then that's a bad sign. It means either I am being forced to sell it to you, under coercion, undue influence, fraud, misrepresentation, mistake. Or secondly, this is a tax fraud because I'm trying to avoid paying taxes, and so I'm under invoicing in a way. I'm sort of reducing the price to a ridiculous extent. And you often come across these things in a lot of situations. So for example, let's look at effect of obligation. So if I say that I will sell this pen to you if you murder XYZ, well, that's not a lawful consideration. So this agreement by itself is not going to be valid. Or if I say that I have a flat in Helsinki, let's say it's worth €5 million, and I want to sell it to you for €5,000, then the law automatically starts presuming that, let's suppose that this is a tax fraud, or that this is some way of messing around, because this is not normal. And the easiest way to deal with this, which many countries and their tax offices adopt, is they say, okay, well, why do you want to sell your €5 million flat to Pawan for €5,000? The government of Finland will be happy to buy it from you for €6,000. Yeah, so thank you. Yeah, take 1,000 extra because you're such a nice person. So of course, this is obviously the best way to reveal that this is a cheating scheme of sorts, because nobody would be selling a flat for a 95%, 98% discount. That doesn't really make sense. Of course, in some situations you could do this. Now, the law of contract may allow this in certain situations. For example, out of love and affection. Now, what does love and affection mean? Well, not love and affection like for you as a student, for me as your teacher. That's not love and affection. Love and affection would be more in the context of a parent giving their flat to their child for a less amount of money, or maybe even for free. Yeah. So of course, then the question that comes up here is, what sort of an agreement is this? Now, that would be contract law or law of obligations, and there are of course different ways of making a contractual agreement valid or invalid. So that's over there, but that's a way of transferring ownership. Some other ways are accession, and then comes incorporation and prescription. So these are quite straightforward. Accession is, you have an apple tree lays apples, so you're the owner of the apples. Let's say you have an expensive dog, and the dog gets pregnant and she gives birth to 10 puppies, then you're the owner. Same goes for a horse, or shares in a company, for example. Incorporation, of course, is anything that attaches to a thing, then becomes something that belongs to you. and there are some examples of this. What this would mean is, let's say you buy a piece of land and it has gold deposits. Now, of course, you could say that belongs to you as well. Although some countries stipulate that up to a certain depth, stuff belongs to you, and below that depth, it belongs to the state. So again, a lot of problems. No concrete synchronization of laws across the world. Every country has its own rules and regulations in this regard. Then there is prescription. Of course, prescription is, as we spoke last time, if you are in an uninterrupted possession, then it's a positive prescription, and then it becomes your property. And well, sometimes, of course, it could be that you've committed a crime or something, and so you're no longer allowed to own property, and that becomes negative prescription. It's also interesting because many countries had this rule. Well, in Europe, we haven't seen a lot of wars lately, so we don't realize this. But in the past, you had these issues. Like, for example, there was a company, Dunlop. Yeah, this is a very famous case in the UK, and they made tires. And or there was this company, Daimler, and again, they made vehicles. And this was, of course, a German company, but they had set up a subsidiary in the UK, and it's a wholly owned German-owned subsidiary, as in the shareholders, the majority shareholders are a German company. So when World War One broke out, then there were a lot of issues in the UK about this, and they said that this would now be enemy company or enemy property, because the owners are Germans and Germans are our enemies. So the country, the state should take over these properties, because you can't have companies that are of vital national economic interest in the ownership of your enemy. So these are all examples of prescription: positive prescription or negative prescription. So again, we looked at some very basic examples and issues, very, very simplistic in a way. And so hopefully that explains a lot of aspects regarding transfer of property. Now, well, you have to be a bit careful here, because now I'll be talking about some concepts of transfer of property by act of parties. And this is a very complicated area of the course, and it has always been complicated, even when I was studying law, and it's the same even now. And many countries have a lot of different rules that come in this regard. Basically, what it means is that you don't have an unfettered right to dispose of your property as you wish, and there are restrictions. Yeah, so well, that's modern life. But of course, many of these restrictions have been around for hundreds of years. Sometimes they were customs, and now they have become more concretized in the form of statutes. So what are concepts of transfer of property by act of parties? Now remember, when we talk about properties, properties outlast most of their owners, especially when you're talking about immovable property. So you have a lot of issues that need to be taken into account over here. Then there are other aspects, like for example, you could have a strange sort of a situation which you need to cover carefully. So one example of this was also recently there was a news article about this. Now let's say you have a house and you own the land, yeah, which is over here. Okay, so now let's say this is the sea, yeah, this part which is in blue. All right, now this is the sandy beach, and this is your house X, and this is your piece of land over here. All right, and so now, of course, there can be a lot of issues that can arise in this regard. Number one is maybe people want to go to the beach. The beach is a public area, and it's not a private beach. So, but the problem is that the only road through the countryside, wherever to go to the beach, passes through your land. And now, can you stop people from passing by? And that's like one aspect. Now let's say this was a villa your great grandfather bought 100 years ago. Yeah, let's assume in Finland. Yeah, and now this is something that you have had for a very long time, but it's a big piece of land, and so the best part about it was you had a really good, amazing sunshine. Yeah, you see that? See, that's your house. You like to sit over here and see the sunshine, sunrise, or maybe it's sunset or whatever. And it's on a cliff, and then there is a sea, river view or something, or a lake or something. So, yeah, again, this is interesting. What happens if you sell the front part of land to somebody else? And can you now tell this person that they cannot have a house that's higher than this height? Yeah. Of course, this could be an issue because sometimes you have crazy people, you don't realize that they are crazy until much later. So you sell your piece of property in front, and then this guy decides to build a house, and then decides to build Big Ben because it reminds him of London and the Queen. And now the problem is your sunshine, sunrise, sunset gets blocked. So what are the ways to deal with such issues? Can you transfer property and dictate how the property should be used? And what would that mean? Is it like, let's say there's a flat in Cadrior or a house in Cadrior Park, and I decide to buy it, or let's say it belongs to my wife's grandmother and she decides to give it to us, and then she says that no, the walls should always be yellow in color. What the hell? Or you can never sell this house. It always has to be in the family. So you can always have some of these crazy people with crazy ideas, and basically what they're trying to do is they're trying to control the usage of property. And the question that comes up is how much can such a thing be controlled, and to what extent? Now this comes up a lot, especially when you do the homework for the wills. You will see a lot of these aspects coming up. People want to dictate how their property should be used, and to what extent should they be allowed to dictate that. Can you have a person who says that I will sell you the house, but for the next 100 years everybody in your family has to wear red pajama pants? What the hell is that? Now, of course, there are some of you who may say, well, it's a freedom, it's a free land, and you have freedom to indulge in contractual obligations, and if you sign on something, then that's it. That's not always true. All right. It's not like you can do whatever you want to do, especially in the context of property, because as I said, property can outlast many generations of people, and it's not always that straightforward. What the law wants is to decide who's the owner. Are you the owner? If you're the owner, you should be able to do whatever you want to do. And is it so that you are not able to do something because somebody who died 55 years ago said how you should control your property? Because if that's the case, then that sort of conflicts with the definition of ownership, or what it means to be an owner. So again, complicated stuff, and we have to look into this. So what is transfer of property? Now when you look at property law, this is the main aspect of property law. It's all about transferring of property, and this is what you would do as a lawyer. This would be the main business that you do: conveyancing, buying, selling, helping people acquire ownership. And so you want to buy property, you would go to a notary's office. So the buyer is here, the seller is there, in the notary's office, and the whole idea is the buyer gives money to the notary, the seller gives all the documentation to the notary or the lawyer will now do the legal work, draw up the agreement. And so once the agreement is done, then both parties sign in the presence of the notary, and then the notary gives the money to the buyer, to the seller, and gives the keys and possession to the buyer. So this is how it works. And of course, there are certain fees that have to be paid in this regard, and all of these issues that the lawyer will take care of. In this case, the notary. Well, of course, if sometimes things get complicated, then you have to sort of look at various aspects about this. So, this can be quite topical. For example, as you know from the news, Stockman, the company, sold the property to a different company, and now they are the tenants in their own premises, yeah, or in their ex premises. And so, again, this would be a very complicated legal instrument, which would indicate now what are your rights. Though even though you have sold it, you are now the long-term tenant or something, and how long would this relationship last, and what are the ifs and buts, and pros and cons, and of course, how can this continue, or what would be the requirements. So all of these are issues that come up over here. So transfer property is, of course, where a living person conveys property in present or in future. Yeah, see, already it's getting a bit complicated. So I'm like saying that, well, I have a house and I have two children, and I'm saying that when my son becomes 18, he will get the house. Yeah, that's quite a long time from now. So how am I deciding these things at this point, and on what basis? What happens when he's 18, 5 years later, 10 years later could be quite different from the situation as it is today. So you have these sort of issues that often come up, and there are legal restrictions to understand these things. So, who's a person competent to transfer? Of course, very, very important. Only a competent person can transfer, and this would either be the owner or somebody who's authorized. And that's why you have these, issues that come up. Can an employee transfer property on behalf of the employer? Yeah, so these are issues. Can a tenant transfer the property of the landlord? Yeah, so of course, that's why if you look at legal agreements, very often it says that we have a contractual relationship, but we are not principal or agent. You don't represent me. You're just an employee or whatever. So there are a lot of these issues that come up. So let's say like I have maybe a laptop which has been given to me by the university. I'm the employee of the university. Can I sell the laptop? Well, without authorization, of course not. Can the rector's office say that, okay, we have 25 old laptops, we can sell them? Well, yeah, because they're authorized. So of course, these are all aspects to keep in mind. And competency of a person, now this is a natural person that we're looking at, would be in the context of age of majority. That's very important. Being of sound mind, that's also very relevant. And not disqualified from contracting. This can be a very important issue, because sometimes if a person declares bankruptcy, then they are disqualified, legally speaking, from getting certain types of jobs or positions in a courtroom, or in a political environment, or in a company. So all of these are very important aspects that should be kept in mind. And there's a whole science about this. There's this whole group of lawyers, genre of lawyers, who spend all their life just dealing with transfer of property, conveyancing of property and things. So it can be a big money spinner, especially if you remember that you get a little percentage for this thing. So like in the law firm I worked, there was a partner who only specialized in property transactions for foreign governments through their embassies and consulates. And as you can imagine, this is a huge business. The ambassador of Finland now wants to buy a property on behalf of the Finnish government. Or let's say the Indian government is now planning to open an embassy in Tallinn. So of course, they would go through a lawyer. And because it's embassy business, it represents a country. You want to have certain high level of properties, and certain status of things. You can't have the ambassador living in a one room flat or something. That's not very good for reputation. So of course, such a property would be in the old town or in Cadriog Park, and ideally what they would prefer is to have a house so that you have the offices downstairs and then the uh, embassy staff can live upstairs, in a secure environment. And of course, something like this would be worth a ton of money. And because it's government to government, also, the Estonian government may not want to charge money as taxes in this regard. So there are a lot of complications that can arise. And of course, as a lawyer, you're dealing with these things, maybe as a notary, and so you're representing your client, or you're the neutral legal entity in the middle. And so this is something that you could spend your rest of your life doing as a work. You just have your office and clients come. They Your job is to identify the property, check out whether it is legally okay, and there are no encumbrances or any problems. And then based on that, who's the seller, is the seller the owner, and do all of these due diligence aspects, as we call them. So now there are certain conditions, condition restraining alienation. Now a lot of these conditions are over here, several of them. When you start reading them, the first two or three make sense, and after that your head starts spinning. But that's normal, okay. But what you have to understand and remember very carefully is that there are two very important terms that are used interchangeably over here, but they are very relevant, and you should be very careful about them. One term is void, void, and the other is voidable. All right. If it's void, it's void. End of the story. Nothing can be done to change that. So let's say I'm already married, and I enter into a second contract of marriage. That's void. Simple. Yeah. Unless there are some religious implications, or the laws of certain religions allow that, and the country provides for polygamous marriages. But otherwise, let's say in Estonia, I'm married to an Estonian. That's it. If I want to marry somebody else now from Finland or from Latvia, well, I have to get a divorce and then marriage. But if I enter into a second marriage, then it's void. If it's void ab initio, that's it. The end, nothing matters. It never existed, never should have been there. And this can be quite problematic, especially if I am already married and I marry a second woman, second time, while my first wife is still living and the marriage is still existing, and now I have children from the second wife. Then what are their rights? What is the second wife's rights? Void. And of course children could have rights, but again, very complicated. But this is contrasted with voidable, and voidable is a very interesting phenomena. It's like competent people. Who's a competent person? Somebody who's above 18. So let's say my son is 15, and he agrees to buy a car from you. Now, of course, this is problematic, right? Because he's not competent to contract. But the law may provide in some situations that this contract does not need to be void. It is voidable. As soon as my son becomes 18, he can decide whether he wants to honor the contract or not. Yeah. So this is voidable. Yeah. You see what's happening here? Void is no, nothing can be done. That's it. The end. Voidable is you have some wiggle room. Yeah. You can have a bit of a gray zone. You can try to do things this way or that way. Of course, it can get a bit complicated, but voidable. And voidable means that the contract is not finito. It's not kaput. It can be brought to life depending on change of circumstances. So for example, let's say I agree to buy a pen from you, and I want to buy this blue pen for 1,000 euros, but because of some confusion, you give me the red pen. Yeah, same price, but yeah, color is different. So now there was some confusion or something. In this case, well, I could always say, yeah, it's okay. I wanted a blue pen, but the red pen is all right as well. So the contract is not void; it is voidable based on my decision. So of course these are very important terms. So keep a keep an eye open for them when you see them, because then they'll make more sense with the examples. So condition restraining alienation, well, very straightforward and simple. Absolute restrainment, yeah, of the transferee. So there is a transferor. Transferor transfers property to you. You are the transferee. I am the transferor. I'm giving the property to you. All right, I'm transferring it to you. So any limitation which absolutely restrains the transferee or any person claiming under him or her from parting with or disposing of the interest in the property, the condition or limitation is void, yeah, except in the case of a lease. So there are these restrictions sometimes, and as you can see from the example over here, any real right contract required for the transfer of immovable property ownership which is entered into conditionally or by setting a term is void. Yeah, so that's something that you have to be careful about. The law straight away says that any condition restraining future alienation is void. Yeah, and so that's the example given there, and that makes sense, right? Yeah. So I have a house, and I cannot make a dictate. I cannot say what you can and cannot do with the new property that I have sold to you. Yeah, well, that's a theoretical part, but of course there could be restrictions sometimes, and some of these restrictions could be, um, maybe if it is that you can only enjoy the property in a particular manner, and well, if there is such a restriction, that would not be acceptable, that would be void. But however, there is a provision, there is an exception, and as an exception is, you had this house, yeah, and you like the sunshine, sunrise, and now you had some property in front, so you sold it, and you said, well, you cannot, use it for anything other than making a simple one floor house. And why is that? Because I want to enjoy the sunrise. So, well, what if somebody decides to make this leaning tower of Pisa, or the Big Ben? Then you could say, well, actually, although I cannot restrict you from using the property as you wish, because you're the new owner of that piece of land, if you do something which hurts or harms my enjoyment of my rights, then I can stop you. All right. So you say that's the thing. It's always these exceptions. Yeah, that's where the law is. It gets super tricky because everything is on track, everything is going fine, and then you have these exceptions, and these exceptions turn everything upside down. And so you come across a lot of these aspects, and we'll talk about more of them. So this is just the beginning. Then the next is rule against perpetuity. Now this will take a bit of time to explain. Yeah, this is a very complicated area, especially because of the historical background to it. So let's stop here for today, and I'll continue on again next week and give you a detailed, in-depth analysis of different property restrictions, yeah, and transfer of property restrictions, and then we'll talk also about this rule against perpetuity. So until then, have a nice day and goodbye.